welcome everyone. Welcome to another live session with Secolve. Peter, how are you?
I'm very good. Thanks, Russell. It's great to be here.
That's good, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for everyone thanks for joining, and thanks everyone else for attending. Just a reminder, please get involved in today's conversation. If you have any questions on offensive testing within OT environments, please ask. We'll address those questions after the session as well. So I'm sure today's session will provoke a lot of ideas or thoughts. Feel free to comment on our LinkedIn post, and we'll address those at some point in the near future. So welcome along. We'll slowly have people joining throughout the next few minutes, I'm sure. I'm Russell Thomas, Regional Sales Manager here at Secolve, operating from the best state in Australia, sunny Western Australia. It's freezing here right now. What's the weather like in Sydney, Pete?
It's actually quite sunny. It's great. I love it. I came from Canberra, which is cold. But yeah, it's a beautiful day in Sydney.
I don't believe it.
Anyway, let's not get into that yet.
Good to have you join us. What's your role at Secolve?
Right. So I just quickly want to say, please ask as many questions as you want. This is a very sort of touchy topic, so I'm sure you'll have lots of things that you want us to touch upon. Right. So my role, my name is Peter. I'm currently in charge of the offensive, also defensive, but for the purpose of this seminar, offensive services at Secolve. To give you a little bit of a background for myself, so you know where I'm coming from. I'm a bit of a nerd, as you can probably tell. I've been hacking things since the 80s. More recently, for the past, let's say, more than a decade, around 15 years, I've been professionally involved in offensive security. So that would be your penetration testing, red teaming, exploit development, reverse engineering, that kind of stuff. For the past, let's say, 4 to 5 years, I've been heavily involved with operational technology environments and devices, and helping companies, across Australia improve their security posture. My first brush with OT was around, the year 2000, when I was developing software for air traffic navigation. So dare I say so myself, I've been involved.
Yeah, I know penetration testing is a very complicated topic. My experience is across the IT enterprise offensive activities. I mean, I can only imagine how complicated it gets with OT. So today we'll aim at touching on that at a high level, talking about the approaches. And let's get started, Peter. I'm just wondering what are the key differences with offensive activities between the IT and the OT environments, and how does that affect your approach?
Right. That's a great question. I'll try to keep it brief. Not sure if I succeed. So first, what I quickly wanted to do is just define offensive activity, so we know what we're talking about. So you can look at it as a scale, as a sort of linear line. At one end, you'd have an automated activity such as vulnerability scanning, which is very limited in scope and time. And on the other end of the offensive activity gamut, you would have things like red teaming, where you're basically allowed to do anything you want. And it's an open-ended long-term activity designed to really sort of like holistically look at the defensive posture of an organization and looking at all the security controls in their sort of totality as a whole, right? And somewhere in the middle, you'd have penetration testing, where you combine these two approaches together. Now, what we've found as the human society is that when we want to discover the security posture of an environment, be it IT or OT, a really good strategy is actually to hire a hacker and let them loose at the environment and see what they can find out. Computer systems, networks, software, it's all very complex. And as we all know, from our experience. And so you can have the best design process, the best requirements, the best testing in the world, but when you deploy things, in the end, there will always be vulnerabilities. So that's just a fact of life. So to discover those, you have to use some sort of an offensive approach. All right, so what are the actual differences then? Probably the main difference, if I put it in plain English, is that in IT, as compared to OT, and I'm not going to define IT and OT, I hope we all understand what these environments are. We don't have that much time. In IT, in your corporate network, things can go down without sort of much impact or without too much grumbling. Whereas in OT, if things go down, they can have very physical, kinetic, or financial consequences. You're looking at penalties in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour, loss of life, that kind of stuff. Whereas in IT, the worst kinetic effect that I've seen is that once we were pen testing and we flooded the network with some scanning traffic, and all the printers on all the floors started spitting out paper. So that was inconvenient. When we found out, we just stopped what we were doing. We had a, let's say, good laugh, but there was no damage done. Whereas in OT, of course, we can understand there could be severe consequences. So these are
to me, it sounds like there should be a lot of planning done then, a lot of collaboration with the customer.
Absolutely, and that's something that I want to touch upon. Communication is the most critical factor in carrying out offensive activities in OT environments. All right, let's sort of quickly wrap up the differences. One big difference that I actually find from my experience of years of experience, that IT environments, corporate environments, are typically well understood, well mapped out, documented. Even people managing them have lots of know-how. There's lots of sort of organizational knowledge that's being transferred around. People know how to manage standard IT environments, whereas in OT, that knowledge is lacking, the skill sets are lacking, there's not a lot of staff involved in that. Typically, they're engineers as compared to your IT technicians, so that's a big difference. Another one is timing. In IT, you can basically choose whatever you want to do when you want to do that, and you can do it alone in your cave without talking to anybody. Whereas when you're doing something with IT, there might be a time window that you have to conform to. You have to be on site, you have to talk to people, you have to walk the corridors, right? And last point that I'm going to make is here we're talking about infrastructure penetration testing. There's lots of different kinds of penetration testing or offensive activity types. When we're looking at separate devices like PLCs, RTUs, or if we're looking at applications, like SCADA operating systems or proprietary DCS stuff, these applications we can sometimes test in isolation. So most of this wouldn't apply, but for infrastructure penetration testing as it's deployed, that's what we're talking about.
There's lots of different approaches. I know customers often need some guidance with how to approach offensive testing. So at Secolve, we are able to tailor our approach to your specific requirements or problems, share our experiences, and show you what is, I guess, of most value with an offensive testing program. So thanks, Peter. I might move on to the common issues being faced when conducting offensive activities across OT. So could you run us through some? I'm sure there's many, right? So do you mind running us through maybe the most common issues that arise when conducting your activities, and just run us through some specific examples of the challenges?
Right. Yeah. So as I said, where do we start? There are so many issues, way more than when we're doing offensive activities in IT environments. But the good news is that most, if not all, of these issues can be managed and overcome And we've been helping our clients do that and understand the risks and then help manage those risks without having any adverse outcomes. And I sort of knock on wood, so far we didn't have any catastrophic outcomes, or even less than catastrophic. Right. So for the issues, I've broadly think there's like 3 categories that I would highlight. First one is people and communication. That's a big one. Then you, of course, have technical issues, and you have legal and regulatory issues. On the communication side, in many organizations, there's a big disconnect between the IT and OT teams. People don't talk to each other. There might be a lack of trust. So bridging that gap is crucial, and that's something that we have helped before many times through sort of a humble approach and listening. It also helps that you actually have proven experience in working with operational technology, and the right words and the right language that you want to use.
Yeah, I think that's pretty critical, like being able to have that common language, to have that OT experience, talk to an OT person it's super useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's key. It's of gaining trust and a rapport, that you actually, you talk the talk and you walk the talk. You actually have seen the things that you were talking about, and it's not, just like pretending, fake it until you make it. You actually have seen things yourself, right? So that's a big issue. On the technical side, there's so many funny things, like even getting tooling into OT is very hard. You have to jump through many loops to get it in. Getting information in and out, perhaps if you want to analyze some data that you've collected on accounts or some privilege sort of matrices, getting that out might be hard for many reasons, technical ones or for regulatory ones. A big problem is that technical offensive activities don't follow a set path or a predefined path. Only in the broad strokes you can say, all right, we'll do sort of reconnaissance, exploitation, pivot, persistence, all that kind of stuff. But how is it actually going to play out in reality? That's a completely different thing. It will meander, it will go down rabbit holes. So this presents a very sort of hard problem on how do you plan for these things if you have to coordinate with many different parties and stakeholders, engineers, owners, operators, that kind of stuff. Not all techniques are appropriate, so you have to know which ones are more dangerous than the others. So you have to really deeply understand what you're doing and what the impacts could be. And then you also have regulatory issues. You have to have onshore resources. You have to comply to various, regulatory statutes. Like you could use your license or other things if you didn't do things properly. So you have to be aware of all of these ramifications of what you're doing. Yes.
Sounds tricky. That's for sure. So,
yes.
So what are solutions then? How do you do it successfully?
Right. Okay. So as we said, communication is absolutely key. That's probably the biggest thing that I would highlight. It sounds mundane, but it really to ensure a success for both or all parties involved, communication is absolutely key. You have to also have a very risk-averse and risk-informed approach. Those are fancy words, but it means that for every single thing, every command that you run, you have to understand the ramifications. You have to do sort of lightweight risk assessment. This might be in the worst case scenario, this might be the impact, and people have to know, about that. Almost to the extreme of, being like extremely risk averse. So you don't actually do anything unless it's agreed upon. There's this great concept of over communication that I quite like, is that you have to communicate more than you think. Over communicate, tell them everything that you're doing so that everybody feels included. All the parties know that they have a say and they're being listened to. That probably applies to many different projects, but it's key in these types of activities as people understandably are very afraid. Another solution, that or a common approach to alleviate lots of risk is before doing an activities, do a quick architectural review, really understand the environment, how it's being laid out, talk to people, talk to the engineers, talk to the infrastructure guys. Perhaps you can piggyback on existing tooling, such as some people already have vulnerability management solutions or network sort of protection, asset discovery tools deployed in OT, even though they might be partially deployed. Very often you can piggyback on those and get lots of very interesting results. You definitely have to identify all the risks for each action and manage that, and understand.
Slightly different to the approach penetration testers typically use in IT then. Often they'll log on to an enterprise without telling anyone and just go for it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it has its benefits, such an approach. You can do much more. One of the biggest issues is that things in OT move slowly. So we're doing, for example, some offensive activities in an OT environment right now, and it takes 10 times more to do basically to run a single command. So that gives you an idea how much slower it is. So if you want to get results quickly, as in IT, it is a good approach. Just do what you want. Sort of manage your risk well, and
Sounds like it's all about planning, safety, business continuity.
Absolutely.
Results in more effort, but definitely the better approach from what I can tell. Yes. So great. I'm keen to understand as well the common approaches used across OT. I'm sure there's dozens and dozens, but maybe if you can just touch on the common approaches you'd use when walking into an OT environment.
Right. Try to
talk through the strategies and the techniques you use as well that are most effective.
Right. So I'll try to sort of summarize and keep it short because as always, I'm talking too much. Right. So one of the biggest and most effective strategies is divide and conquer. That means breaking down the problem into smaller, manageable chunks and focusing on those in a sequence. So what that would mean for OT environments, for example, is that we'd limit ourselves to machines on a certain level of the Bruder model. For example, you just look at the HMIs, SCADA headends, servers, engineering workstations that have off-the-shelf operating systems that will not go down if you poke them a little bit. You might limit yourself to a certain type of a device or a machine. So you would say, all right, we want to look at this PLC or an RTU in isolation, and we want to understand the risks and the configuration, the way it's deployed and the way we've configured it to the broader network. There's another great approach that for lack of a better word, just to put it in a plain English, I call backwards pen testing. So instead of sort of doing, reconnaissance, exploitation, identifying vulnerabilities, writing exploits or living off the land, that kind of stuff, you actually assume, okay, I'm on the machine, I've compromised it, all right, I have access, and then on that machine, I will figure out what the vulnerabilities are and then work backwards on how could I have exploited them to come at the same result. And that would help me not actually have to do all the poking around that could destabilize and potentially impact operations of OT assets. So you're kind of arriving at everything backwards. There's also paper-based pen testing, which also you might sort of look at it as a configuration review, if I put it in simpler terms, where you look at a firewall config and then try to understand, okay, this would be a pathway that I would take through an operational technology environment. And another approach is that you have to thoroughly document everything down sort of to commands. You have to communicate that, and that helps you manage the risk.
Mm.
Right. That's me.
Interesting.
Short.
No, it's really interesting. So I've read through some of your previous engagements with customers, and what sparked an interest with me was how you can help mature their security operations and their blue teaming or their tooling as well. So
Right.
I'm keen just to understand at a high level, once this, let's call it entry level penetration testing, is done across an IT or an OT enterprise, you can probably advance your testing, can't you, by doing some purple teaming, helping the blue teams operate.
Yeah, great questions. I'm gonna add another one, and that's true. So we haven't actually, I think what we might not have touched upon is when is it appropriate to do offensive testing or offensive activities in OT environments. Is it appropriate at all? So that sort of is prior to your question, like if you want to mature, just being conscious of time, but I shouldn't. So I think it's more, just to answer my own question, it's actually probably more appropriate at more often than you think, but it has to be very sort of risk averse and risk informed. It's still, as I touched upon, one of the most effective, if not the most effective way of discovering actual risk and the posture of an environment as it's built and deployed, even though we're hindered by lots of constraints in OT environments. It's still one of the most effective, if not the most effective way to truly understand the risks.
Yeah.
So it's, in that sense, it will always be appropriate if done correctly, and with somebody who knows what they're doing, right? So once you've, once you're sort of cut your teeth and you know what you're doing, and the people are on board, and the communication issues have been resolved, and everybody's kind of, been through their, it's not their first rodeo, and you're ready to go further. There are many things that can be done. One of them is what's typically in this industry called purple teaming, or what really is some sort of a collaborative approach between both parties. Now, typically, organizations have defensive capabilities and the contractors have offensive capabilities. Not a lot of companies have their own internal offensive capabilities. Hence, sort of, it follows that the purple team would have offensive consultants and defensive sort of purple teaming in-house staff, right? But it could be the other way, in theory. Anyway, just putting that out there, right? So that
with that, I assume that two of the main goals would be maybe test your detection capabilities, test your logging, improve the tooling.
Yes.
As well as the controls, yeah?
Yes, as well as sort of everything. So one other difference that we haven't spoken about is that IT environments tend to be dynamic for various reasons. For example, you can write off, for tax purposes, software or products after a couple of years. So these things get refreshed quite often. Whereas in OT, these environments are quite static and smaller. So that being said, they're also sort of not very well understood in many cases because people are just afraid to touch them. So in these purple teaming or whatever collaboratory exercises, we discover all the vulnerabilities or many of the vulnerabilities. Through doing that, we exercise the detection, if present, and we help sort of fine-tune or even understand that. In many cases, the people who are looking at the alerts don't understand what they're looking at or which out of these alerts are the important ones. So that's where we come in, because to us it's like, all right, this for sure, this one you're going to ignore and just delete it, and this one is the one that you want to look at, but people don't have that know-how or knowledge. In many cases, these things are being used by engineers. So some companies have OT security within the remit of IT security teams, or there are dedicated OT security teams. In some other organizations, it's within the remit of engineers. So they have to understand what they're looking at. There's a big sort of, or one of the trickiest parts in responding to incidents in OT, like actual incidents in OT, which are not very common, certainly not as common as the ones in IT, is that you cannot, like if you look at an alert, you might not understand what it means. So you have to talk to the engineers. Perhaps there's somebody is updating something. There's a new command being sent to a PLC, but even the engineer wouldn't know what's happening. So they have to investigate, and it will take days. Whereas in IT, quite often after a while, you really understand what you're doing. So in OT, this is sort of to help people understand and work and with their detection capabilities. That's where I feel like we can give the most value.
Yeah, great. No, it's a really interesting topic, and maybe one we can take up later, do a future live stream on. I'm keen to hear from the audience what particular TTPs maybe or offensive topics interest you. Peter and I can jump online and elaborate in the future. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Peter, for sharing all of that wisdom, your experience with us.
Nice.
Great to have you today, and we'll call it a day there, guys, and see you all next time. Thanks for joining.
All right.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
See you, mate.
Thank you.
Bye.